We're here part of the Climate Resilient Organic Vegetable Production series with a focus on reducing tillage. And Rue invited Tony Enns to speak on cut and carry mulch systems, which is something Tony had worked on a while ago and has maintained work in over the years. And so, Tony, would you mind introducing yourself to the group? And then we'll go around and do some quick introductions before we get started.
My wife, Della, and I operated for 25 years, community-supported agriculture operation about 30 miles south of Madison. And as we grew older, and my wife had a double knee replacement, we started going back to the professional work and reinventing ourselves to try to provide the pension that farming so capital intensive never permitted. So for 3 years, I've been working for the United States Department of Agriculture's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. I write and edit regulation for them, working with veterinary scientists and plant pathologists. It's a big agency with a mission to try to stop disease and pest largely from international trade, from complicating and troubling and disrupting our own animal and plant production. So the PowerPoints were developed in 2018 from SARE studies that I conducted with Jim Studi, Dr. Jim Studi, whom I've known for about 25 years and worked with in different capacities. That it really helped us understand the advantages, the strong advantages of prairie grass mulch compared to other types of straw that I'd been using, and certainly had strong advantages over black plastic.
Thank you, Tony. Let's see, let's just maybe quick go around, and if you can say your name, the farm or organization that you are part of, and also where you are in the world, I think that would be helpful as we get started. Tenzin, can I call on you to go first?
Sure. My name is Tenzin Botsford. I'm a Red Door family farm up in Athens, which is in north central Wisconsin. And we got about 10 acres of vegetables, mostly for CSA and the like. And we use a fair amount of black plastic, and I would love to move away from that. We have some extra acreage that's sort of in fallow. Some of it does have prairie grass creeping into it, and some of it's creeping into our prairie grass, but I'm interested what we can learn here. Thank you.
Thank you. Rufus, would you go next?
My name is Rufus. Keewaydin Farms is my farm. I farm on the land that I grew up on. It's a 200-acre chunk of land. I farm a couple acres of vegetables. I went to no-till method a couple years ago. And then from there, I've bounced back and forth between several different methods of farming. Last year being a little bit more or less, same amount of no-till, but more of tilling as well. So anyway, let's see. Yeah.
You're calling from Wisconsin, I think.
Oh yeah, Viola, Wisconsin. Thank you.
That's very good.
Thank you.
Kevin at Good Turn
Gardening. It's my 19th year too, by the way. Okay, that's it.
18th year. Great. Thank
19th.
you, Rufus. Oh, 19th. Kevin at Good Turn Farm.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Kevin. Good Turn Farm is in Stockholm, Wisconsin. That's in west central Wisconsin on the border with Minnesota. We've got probably 2 acres of intensive vegetable production and flowers and quite a few high tunnels. And we're transitioning another 2 to 3 acres to a no-till kind of perennial grass system where we're doing rows in that and probably do some mulching, cut and carry into it.
Nice. Thank you, Kevin. Jeremy Baker or Barker rather.
Yeah, hi, I'm from Amherst, Massachusetts.
Oh my goodness, I grew up right down the road from you.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah. I'm at Simple Gifts Farm. We grow about 10 acres of organic veggies. We've been doing some no-till stuff for the past 3 years, including cut and carry for 2 years. And I think that we modified our transplanter based on a picture that we saw in Tony's SARE report
Oh,
that
cool.
we were turned on to by Lincoln, who's also in Massachusetts, and he'll introduce himself at some point. But yeah, we like it, and we're messing around with trying to figure out how to modify our transplanter more to plant into a heavy mulch. So I'm interested to hear about what you guys are doing out there.
Nice. Thank you, Jeremy. Daniel Amato.
Hi everyone, my name is Daniele, coming from Italy. It's my first time I join your team, your group, and I'm so proud and honored for that. I'm coming from Italy. I'm a medical doctor. I'm a musculoskeletal radiologist. I was born in countryside, actually. I've got the countryside just behind me and the seaside just behind you, just in front of me, if you can imagine this southeast coast of Italy. And yes, I was just curious about something close to my roots, actually. And yes, this is me. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. I wonder what time it is near you. Not the time it is here.
No, not at all. It's about 10 past 11 p.m.
Oh my goodness. That is good on you for the stamina. Lincoln, look, you're here, but I can't tell if it's going to be easy for you to introduce yourself. Your video is a little cloudy, but I see you come off mute.
Yeah, I don't know. That may be a problem with my phone. I don't know. It's sort of distressing to see. Hello, everyone. My name is Lincoln. I'm from SARE Farm in Western Massachusetts. We're like secretly trying to infiltrate your group here.
It's not a secret, Lincoln. We feel infiltrated and we're grateful for it. You're welcome.
Yeah, we do like 5 acres of mixed vegetables, and we've been playing with a bunch of different no-till methods over the last few years. And Tony, yeah, that SARE grant, I don't know if you remember, I called you a few years ago and you were very generous with information. And I'm excited to hear more about it.
Thank you, Lincoln. Michael Doherty.
Hey everybody, I'm Michael. I farm at Promega Farms, Bell 4 Acres in Fitchburg, Wisconsin. We do different types of no-till and cut and mulch areas. So I'm trying to just learn different styles and how I can integrate them into my practices.
Thank you, Michael. C-A-R-O. Caro? Is that
Caro.
how Caro? Thank you, Caro.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm Caro. I'm the regional soil health specialist for American Farmland Trust New England. I'm in Massachusetts, and I'm really interested in transfer mulch systems. And I do some work with Jeremy and Lincoln, who are both on the call. And I think maybe we all heard about this webinar from my colleague Julie Fine, who sent it around. So we're all really interested in no-till, especially in organic vegetable production. So I'm really excited to hear this presentation.
Thank you. Jeff?
Hi there, I'm Jeff Schreiber, and I'm in Wisconsin, a little north of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I have a CSA farm, about maybe 8 acres of vegetables, and this is our 13th year, and I've been trying some no-till stuff in the last few years with quite limited success, I would say.
Nice to see you, Jeff.
Thanks.
Thanks for being here. Rami?
Hi there, I'm Rami Albaromia. Our farm is just west of Madison, Wisconsin. And we've got about 4.5 acres of apples, pears, plums, some peaches. And so I guess we've done a little bit of cut and carry, but with wood chips where we're using those. But I've always been interested in doing kind of a cut and carry thing with, especially on new rows, where putting that down to help keep the weeds down for a year or two or something. And also looking and doing a little bit of vegetables next year and trying to see how to make that as easy as possible.
Nice. All right. Thanks. Welcome. Nice to see you, Dan. I know Dan's calling from Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I'm Dan with PASA. I live in Pittsburgh and run farmer training programs around Pennsylvania. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here, Dan. And then Mike, you're my last person.
Hi, Claire. I'm joining in from Northern Illinois, and I manage an 1.5 acre farm that we just started this year for somebody. And I've been kind of going after like less till approaches the last few years. And this webinar topic really caught my eye as that's something I'm interested in trying out. So thanks for letting me join.
Yeah, welcome. Welcome, everyone. And thank you for that thorough introduction. And I'm going to share my screen again so that you can get started, Tony.
Well, again, we started with no tools, no experience, no credit, and grew very slowly over 25 years. The first year we only had 5 subscribers, and I broke ground with a spade. Rented a tiller from a hardware store. And as we kept growing and adding subscribers to our Scotch Hill farm, and this was starting in 1994, we kept investing in what we could afford. And first it was walk behind equipment, and then we added tractors and a tiller, a rotavator, and then haying equipment. And we kept taking on more and more corners of fields that nobody back then seemed to want to rent. This is a 5-acre field that we were able finally to secure a long-term lease. Behind the household, which would be to the left of this field, was another 22 acres that we rented. And I began in blocks on that property, raising about 7 acres of vegetables and up to 5 acres of sweet corn, producing hay. And as I would take ground out of hay, as I put ground into hay, I started growing oats and using an old all-crop harvester to harvest oats, and then winter wheat and rye and sorghum and sunflowers. I experimented with lots of different crops, and for the vegetables, you know that the weeds are growing 4 times faster than any of the plants that we brought out of our greenhouse, our bedding plants that we put in the ground. And labor's very expensive, often a third or more of income from vegetables is spent on hand labor or very expensive equipment. When we started rolling this black plastic by hand and transplanting into it by hand until we could find and purchase a 2-row transplanter. And everything we did, we realized tremendous increases in efficiency. The black plastic was very troublesome. Why don't we start working through this? And as I said in the beginning, I developed this PowerPoint for an agriculture marketing club at the University of Wisconsin-Platteville. My students there in 2018 took a great interest in switchgrass, and they were from conventional backgrounds, interested in alternatives. like switchgrass production. So our first mulch layer was this contraption, and it worked great. It laid the drip tape underneath, and the only problem was in the fall when we had to take it all up. We were early members of the Madison Area Community Supported Agriculture Coalition, which is now Fair Share. And at some point they decided that everybody had to become certified organic, and removal of the black plastic was a requirement. So let's go on. So you can see here, we first started experimenting with straw mulch from winter wheat that I would grow. Actually, before becoming certified organic, I would go to a field a conventional field, and bale straw there after the harvest. But then that became prohibited when we became certified organic. And for good reason. There's as much as 2 or 3 years carryover of herbicide from wheat straw. Here is mulched garlic, and you can see it's completely weed-free. It's mulched over winter with straw. But we're still, you can see in the background, still using some black plastic. Advance. So the first SARE study, and it's very gratifying that SARE still makes the studies available on the website. And I do, from time to time, get people very curious about the studies and asking me more details from all around. Here we did a comparison of switchgrass mulch on the eve of Obama's first election, when a neighbor from about 6 miles away called and asked if I would come and bale straw. And it was November, and I was very curious. His machinery had broken down. When I got to the field, I found 20 acres of switchgrass, all just completely weed-free. And I had never been able in an organic system to grow oats, especially weed-free. And I baled the switchgrass, and I got to keep half of it. And I started using it from that and found it to be vastly superior to anything I'd used. So there was no incidence of plant disease in the prairie grass mulch, but both the wheat and oat straw hosted some plant disease. And I believe it's because the switchgrass is native and the oats and the wheat are introduced from our European ancestors. So they haven't built up a resistance to rust and other diseases that are troublesome in wet conditions. Okay, should we go on? So here you can see the trials that we conducted. And I was working with Dr. Jim Studi, whom I'd written about when he was in graduate school, when I worked for a daily newspaper, and then started working with him for 5 years at Michael Fields when I was in communications, and he was conducting the Wisconsin Integrated Cropping Systems trial. And then we both left there, and he became my extension agent. And that's when we started collaborating in SARE projects. So here you can see wheat straw, oat straw, and prairie grass straw. Doesn't appear to be too much difference. You can see the wheat's a different color and the grass is lighter. Let's go on and see some more of the results. So unlike the black plastic, we get something from the decomposition of the mulch. We don't have to remove it. And that last column over there, the carbon to nitrogen ratio, is particularly gratifying and enlightening. So when we compost, we want the organic matter to be about a, what is it, 20 or 30 ratio of carbon to nitrogen, because that's when the microbes can really start breaking it down and giving us these macronutrients back to the soil. And you can see that the carbon to nitrogen ratio for the prairie grass starts at about half what the wheat straw is. So this means it's going to break down over winter much better and till quickly into the soil. And its contribution is the soil just over the winter into the spring and summer got such nice qualities to it that the straws tie up nitrogen a little longer and are slower to start yielding that fertility. Okay. So here was a comparison. He monitored in the space that we had the different vegetables that we did a comparison with, and then did an inventory of the types of weeds that were eventually emerging as the straw and the grass mulch would break down. There really wasn't too much difference except in the oat straw, which had a lot of volunteer. I have not had a problem with that. Oats don't grow very vigorously. They don't get very high. And over time, they do provide that same kind of tilth that I recognized and welcomed in the prairie grass in contribution to the soil. Okay. And you saw that was 40 days after planting, which is more than enough time for any of the 60 varieties of vegetables that we planted or transplanted to get up and going and canopy. So then I started, I rented a field and I decided I would establish some switchgrass. And here was a planter that was made available to me by the Department of Natural Resources as they were trying to encourage plantings, prairie grass plantings for wildlife cover. Seed was sown at 5 pounds to the acre. It takes 2 to 3 years to establish, but if you manage that grass just by cutting it enough those first 2 years that any weeds that are coming up don't get a chance to establish, don't go to seed, and the grass keeps getting more vigorous and better and better established. I did not use a controlled burn in the fall, which is what is customarily used to increase vigor and suppress weeds. And I started harvesting in the 3rd year. The planter has to have these beaters. The seed's very light. In any kind of prairie grass seed, some is very fluffy like dandelion seed. And so you need the beaters, and sometimes even maybe something else to kind of weight down the seed and carry it into the planter. But with this Truax planter, I never needed anything but the seed itself. Here I was planting using the Truax. I had to disc the field really well, and then it took the seed very well. So the first 2-year comparison, we used all 3 mulch types in 12 crops. We were using some varieties that would have a lot of traffic, like tomatoes. We were harvesting over maybe 6 weeks, every 3 or 4 days. and low traffic like the Brussels sprouts, which just need weed suppression until in the fall when they're finally ready for us to harvest. Dr. Studi, James Studi observed the weed suppression. He estimated the organic matter rate of decomposition, and he watched carefully and periodically for the incidence of plant disease and the tendency for the material to volunteer. So then it's a little initially driving a pickup truck and pulling a wagon with 100 bales of switchgrass, mulch, or straw, wheat straw or oat straw down a driving path between these double row plantings of vegetables and taking them apart by hand and piecing them in around the plants. And I got the idea of rolling out 1,000-pound bale of straw, and realized it would be more inconsistent, especially this straw that you see got wet a good bit before I actually was able to roll it out. And it was irregular and it didn't come across evenly, but it was an amazing experiment for me. This is over potatoes. You can see them placed in the tilled bed, so I tilled with a 50-inch rotavator and applied manure and bedding from our livestock, sheep and goats mostly, over in the spring from winter. And after that decomposed, tilled it in. And then within the restrictions for application of manure, Dell and I laid out the drip tape and placed potato starts along the drip tape. And then, and it was three double rows, I believe, about 100 yards. And then I started pulling these 1,000-pound bales of mulch over the potatoes. So you can see our 2-row transplanter. I have a son who's a fantastic welder. He was welding for Kuhn International in make manure spreaders and rakes and all kinds of mid-scale and large-scale field equipment. And then he went to Fairbanks Morris in Beloit, and he had access in his free time to quite a bit of cast off metal, and I paid him to make me these points. So you can see them, the other side, you can see the existing point that we used through the black plastic, and then the more aggressive points that he made, just triangular shape from, he was trying for a real heavy piece of metal that under the weight and would hold up. And then, and it's really not that significant of weight, but not tear. It's bolted. You drilled a hole and bolted it from the other side, and used a rounded nut so that it wouldn't clod a lot of dirt and pick up a lot of dirt, so to let free, and yet be significantly higher from the frame to penetrate that extra an irregular round bale application. And here you can see us, 2 of our most loyal subscribers at the time, transplanting into the mulch, from bedding plants into the mulch. It looks like it's been a while. It's been around 2010 or 12. And I think that we did mostly broccoli and cabbage. Okay, it worked great. We did have to jerry rig some cardboard underneath that that they held with their feet to keep from pulling up the straw. And over time, if we could have kept going, I'm sure we could have made a lot of modifications that would have been, you know, better than what we ad-libbed with along the way.
Tony, Rami's asking in the chat, approximately how many feet does a round bale unroll to?
I bought 8 of those round bales, and I'm trying to remember. Seems like I used 4 of them in those potatoes, and the potatoes were, I think, mostly 100 to 200 feet long, the beds. In the coverage was pretty good, but I think sometimes it would take 2 rolls to get to the end of that length of space. So probably between, and it again, it would have been better if we could have done it without it being in a state of decomposition from rains that plagued us that year in the early spring. So I'm thinking it was between 100 and 200 feet for a 1,000-pound round bale.
Patty and Mike are saying we found a tight, well-baled 4x4 grass hay would do approximately 200 feet. So similar.
Yeah, that's about right.
Thank you.
So I started selling. I did not have, the rented ground was not as prolific in its production and yield as that 20-acre field that a neighbor first asked me to come and help him with. And I got consistently over 5 or 6 years about 100 bales of switchgrass per acre, which from estimates that I've read about is a half or less than what a ground probably better suited for that prairie grass. Some of this was on the border of wet, and it would have been better if it had been a well-drained field, I'm sure. And there are other prairie grasses you could use, just as there are other small grains than oats and wheats that you could use. Rye is sometimes very dense and prolific in its production, but then with older equipment, it's a little harder to harvest it as straw. Depends on how much you have for equipment. My harvester, my old all-crop harvester, cost $225. And once I learned to use it, it worked pretty well. My neighbor had a used, he's this 3rd-generation farmer, and he grew wheat every year. And he would complain periodically about $10,000 expenses on his used harvesting equipment. You can do things much more efficiently, but you will spend a whole lot more money. Here, this is off the web. I was searching for round bale apparatus and equipment, and you have to go to Europe to find sometimes you can find distributors of European, especially Italian equipment. I think in Kentucky, I talked to a fellow that was selling for an Italian manufacturer. They have walk behind equipment that you could make these round bales. And the reason I was really interested in that was you can see, obviously, even a child can manipulate these round bales. And I was selling, producing more mulch than I could use and selling to Paradigm Gardens in Madison, who was marketing the straw to backyard gardeners, community gardens, church gardens, and weed suppression was really important to them. And round bales could be just so easily applied, just rolled out like a carpet, as you saw the big 1,000-pound bale I was trying to roll out with a tractor. I have an old rotabaler, but these are pretty dangerous machines, and these were the first round bales made, and they were the size of the 40, 50-pound bales. Here's someone using a BCS powered cab mini baler. This was another picture I got off the internet of round bales being made. The Alice Chalmers round baler that you see was about $2,500 restored, and it could make round bales a little bit bigger than that, that could be rolled out the same way. But it's all in how much money you have to spend, and you get better safeguards and protections on the newer equipment than you do that old round baler from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So I listed in the SARE report and also in the PowerPoint some sources that I used, and these were up to 2018. I've encountered so many more interesting things that are being done, like the growing of rye, the timing of killing the rye with just these. I've written about them, but the name's slipping my mind. In the organic broadcaster, I've written about some of the new techniques that just killing the mulch in the field and then drilling into it, which I've seen some beautiful production of soybeans in fields like that, just completely weed free. But again, it's all in the scale of production that you, the land, access to land, the scale of production, and the access to equipment. So with these students, this marketing club at the UW-Platteville, I explored with them in a comparison with corn, how profitable prairie grass could be. And we can kind of go through these slides quickly because it doesn't sound like many of the growers that are on this call would be interested in. So if you want to, and I was going to try to organize a cooperative. I was invited to apply for a small business innovation research grant. I had 3 successful SBIR grant projects over 6 years and had stopped as I tried to transition into other work, competing for those grant projects. And the Center for Integrated Ag System was going to cooperate with me, and I had some conventional growers who were going to try growing on some of their land, mulch, and some smaller growers and rural residential owners of prairie that were going to try this system of establishing prairie grass, harvesting it once a year, late, very late in the season, November. I would harvest just before the snow. And at that point, all the seed it's gone to seed. There's no volunteering of any seed in the mulch once it's applied, and bulking the production and selling to the market that's in the additional slides. So perennial harvest is possible after 2 or 3 years of establishment. It needs little or no annual input cost. It's good for at least 10 years. I think it could be indefinite length of time that the prairie grass would be available, maybe only occasionally, application of some dry manure, just as you would a hayfield. It builds fertility, it conserves soil, it contributes to crops ecologically. And the yields that I found in research were much greater than what I had, 4 to 6 tons per acre. So at the time in 2018, I compared what these conventional farm kids families were getting per acre and spending per acre, and what the outlook was, and what the return was, and the actual return. We can go on to the next, I think. When I was in Washington, D.C. in 2015, I stumbled into a display of a marvelous a capturing of the root masses from different prairies, grasses, and they really do have 15 to 18 times the root mass of field corn. And in other words, they're contributing mightily to microbial activity and helping of great interest now, given the concern about climate change. The carbon sink that they provide. And if we harvest just one cutting and market to suburban and urban growers, I think it would be a far better use and a greater return from the land. The next slide. So this was an intern at our farm, or an apprentice, and well, the seeding rate was in that first slide. I think it was 5 pounds per acre. And prairie grass seed can be pricey, depending on the variety and the source. But this was another early use of our application of wheat straw. I really do think that it's worth the investment in the straw, to experiment with the straw as a mulch. And I really think that there could be producer pools near all urban areas of switchgrass or prairie grass producers, and marketing the small bales, small round bales, large round bales to CSA growers and all kinds of urban farms and gardens. Next slide.
Oh, Tony, did we lose you? Looks like your screen is frozen. Oh, okay. We definitely lost Tony. Oh, there you are. You're just on mute. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Sorry about that. Then these statistics are kind of old. I'm sure that there are far more CSA farms. There were only 400 CSA farms when we started in community supported agriculture. It's pretty amazing how much this has grown. But they all struggle to suppress weeds and black plastic mulch. These are statistics that I tried to revise in 2018. They need revision again, but I've been working for USDA, teleworking full time, and contracting, editing, and writing, and teaching writing. I just haven't had time to update these figures. I'm sorry. Lots of money being spent on, and these are old estimates on black plastic, and it can only increase as it's fossil fuel dependent. And we really did get 12 to 14 weeks of weed suppression from all varieties of mulch that we used, the small grains and the switchgrass. Then these were just some examples of the kind of money that's being spent in urban households to grow vegetables, and many people in Chicago and Milwaukee, Madison, who would sign up for our farm would start liking the taste of vegetables and get enthusiastic about growing their own and quit us. And sometimes 3 or 4 years later, they come back and say, well, the gardens were a weedy mess and they didn't have a chance ever to weed, and they would often lose what they grew, and they were coming back to us. But if you could help them control weeds, I wouldn't recommend using mulch in something like beds of lettuce. You'd have a devil of a time trying to clean most greens, clean the straw out of it. But most bedding plants is very, very good weed suppression and no problem. So again, this was just trying to document the market. As a vegetable crop farmer, I always listened when they said, have your market figured out before production and before increasing production. And we would set a goal each year as we grew, how many shares we wanted to provide for, and we would plant to that number. It's important to figure out a market for switchgrass too, if a person wanted to raise switchgrass and sell it to the public. It's just again showing the potential. The market is there, it's real, and people use black plastic in the city too. Would help them keep black plastic out of landfills and keep it from leaching into the soil. Next slide. And then again, the kids that were interested in these alternatives with me at UW-Platteville, the year that I taught there, were from conventional backgrounds, and I was trying to help them, if they really were serious about it, have some ammunition for when they went home, and tried to persuade parents to let them carve out some space to experiment. maybe we should, unless there are any questions, we should go on to the, I got $8 a bale usually when I sold through the Paradigm Gardens, and they were doubling the price. There was another garden supply in Chicago that would buy from me, and they would double the price too. I never got more than $8 when I sold it to the public individually when people would call me, but there was very strong repeat business. People would come back 3 and 4 years to buy straw from me. So,
All right. Thank you, Tony. That's what I have as your last slide. Does that work? Does that
Yeah.
jive with you
Yeah.
also? Okay. All right. Well, why don't we open it up for any questions for Tony? It looks like the pounds per acre was answered in the chat box.
5 pounds of seed. And when I first bought seed, I went to Applied Ecological Services outside of Broadhead, which was one of the first native species seed banks for native species seeds. And then toward the end there, I was seeing switchgrass seed being marketed online through big retail stores and online sources at competitive prices. I didn't buy it that way, and I wouldn't buy it that way, but it's showing a lot of interest in establishing native species seed. And you could harvest seed, or you could, as I said, I would harvest just before the snow would fly to make sure that there was no volunteering of seed. And it was also a good time for me because I was completely done with our CSA. Although we did start growing in coop houses, some winter production. Some years, 30 miles south of Madison, we would have spinach, carrots, white turnips, some brassicas all winter long. There was so much less sunlight that we could only harvest maybe once every 3 weeks, but it did provide extra income. And yet there was time for that one cutting and baling of prairie grass in November. And then there were some, I lost that ground. Someone came along and offered $40 more per acre for the entire farm, and they refused to let me continue on. I had 3.5 acres of hay in one field, and I was in the 6th year of prairie grass in the other field, 3.5 acres, and I lost it. So it's nice if you have your own ground and you can dedicate a corner to prairie grass. You could have it your entire life if you managed it.
I have a question.
Sure.
Thanks a lot for your presentation, by the way. That's pretty cool to see all the stuff that you have tried. And, we did a little bit of mulching last year with round bales that we've harvested off of our land. And we found, obviously, the thicker you put it on, the better. So we piled it on, many feet when it was fluffy, in the fluffy stages. But I guess the question I had was with your switchgrass, were you attempting a pure stand switchgrass, or I've heard you kind of use prairie grass as well. So I imagine at some point you have several species in there.
No, I used and the fellow who had the 20-acre stand, he he was interested in selling the seed back to Applied Ecological. And so he used a native species, a species native to Wisconsin. And I got the same species thinking the same thing. I never actually had them come. They would come and harvest the seed in the fall if they were interested, but their plantings of switchgrass exceeded their interest in going to any rented fields. It was only there are certain species of prairie that they would find, and they would pay the landowners to go and harvest the seed. I didn't have, obviously, the equipment to harvest the seed. There are other things you can do that would bring in income. So if you're going to harvest just before snow, ground nesting birds would have taken advantage of the prairie, and especially the larger it was. And if you are interested, you could sell hunting rights. I do it to a limited number so they wouldn't trample the stands of prairie grass. But the selling of the seed, in addition to the selling of the straw, would be another income source. If you talk to a native species business, they can help you pick a variety that would be native to your area.
One other thing too, it's funny because we got a few sheep up here, and so we've been kind of looking at watching YouTube videos, and I've got a link that I'll post on the chat of this guy who's got a bale unroller. He uses it in sheep. I'm sure people have heard of him. He's probably kind of popular in some circles, but it's similar to what you were using, you know, but maybe a little bit more
sophisticated.
Yeah, it's a few generations deeper, but I'll post that on the chat.
Yeah,
and that's for unrolling bales, Rufus. Like Kevin's asking in the chat about spreading the mulch by hand or using equipment, so it's relevant to that.
It's him. I think I haven't actually watched the video, so I'm sorry if it's totally off topic, but I think it's him explaining how the machine works, and it's piercing the bale and then unrolling it behind your tractor or something.
Yeah, that's exactly what I did.
I just this guy's a sheep farmer, and I've seen it used. I was actually watching a video a couple days ago, and it was some rancher guy using it in his pasture.
Well, I just took a long metal pole or piece of solid metal and pierced the center, and then I used straps and strapped it to the 3-point, and pulled it along, and it unraveled over the potato starts and unraveled over the other tilled beds that I had prepared for transplanting. And it'll settle down with a few rains, it'll settle down so that it flattens, and then you can use those some kind of larger, deeper point on the transplanter to penetrate the points that he made that you saw, which were only an inch higher than the existing points on the water wheel transplanter. They did fine. They got to the soil, made a hole in the soil, and then the water was fed from the tank into the hole, and all they had to do was, as they rode along on the 2-row, and Applied Ecological has 6- and 8-row transplanters, I believe, when they transplant. And it depends on the scale of production. It was, for us, with 7 acres, about 60 varieties of plants, not all of them transplants, some direct seeded. A 2-row was more than adequate and great improvement over hand application of everything. It's worth the investment. Tobacco farms, old tobacco farms, sometimes you can purchase them because that's what they used in tobacco planting.
Kevin, does that get at your question?
It looked like in some of the slides that you're hand spreading square bales, and I was wondering if you were still doing that, or are you using mostly round bales when you're putting switchgrass on?
Well, I stumbled onto those round bales through as I told you, I lost my stand of switchgrass, and then the other place that I would go and bale on shares, I lost that too, because he finally fixed his own equipment and then wanted to keep it all to himself. But then I found the Fish and Wildlife Service was experimenting by having for ground nesting habitat prairie grass that they had been spending money on burning to control weeds, and they decided they would try to compare with letting area producers come in and harvest the grass rather than burn it off, and timed around the nesting of the birds they were trying to protect. And when I got to the field, there was another fellow there, got there ahead of me, and he was a custom straw harvester and provider, and he had all kinds of equipment there, and they were making 1,000-pound bales. And I said, "Where are you selling these?" And he said, "As bedding to dairy farms." Oh. And I said, "Would you sell me some?" And he said, "Sure." And I think it was $28 a bale. I think I bought 8 bales for a couple $100, and I did go ahead and bale 100 bales for my small squares with my equipment, but I sent a son home to bring a 20-foot trailer, and they put 8 of those round bales on there for me, and just put it into the field, turned the bales on their sides and rolled them into place, pierced the bales with metal and attached. It was all jerry-rigged. I didn't have any special equipment. You can buy harnesses that you could, that would be much more efficient in control of straw and the application across the beds. Periodically somebody had to help me orient that big round bale so it wouldn't go off into the grass path, and it didn't take very long to apply. So my own capacity for baling was limited to the straw, to the small squares. That was a one-time serendipitous discovery. I could have kept contact with him, and I could have kept buying them from him, maybe paid him to transport them to our farm. But as my wife had a double knee replacement, and I couldn't go alone with the CSA and 210 subscribers, and we innovated as much as we could to keep from paying a lot of help. And we had interns some years, terrific interns, and turning people away, and other years no interest at all. And it's tough, it's just tough all around, especially when you get into your 60s. I had to reinvent myself, and we both have gotten out of subscription farming, and I miss it.
Lincoln, you've got your hand up. Do you have a question?
I do. I'm sorry about my camera. Tony, thank you so much for all this information. It's really great. And I know you've already kind of answered this question, but I'm just gonna, I have not tried, Jeremy has tried the points on the water wheel. I'm curious if you've used those points in anything other than switchgrass and I don't know, any other information, I guess, that you have about that. Like I said, I haven't tried it. I find it difficult to imagine. I'm rolling out round bales of hay, and often it's like junk rat bales. So it's a tighter weave than a dry bale. But even with dry bales, especially if it's like late first cut, I don't know. There's just like it's sort of woven into a mat. Second cut can be, I can imagine working well because it's smaller pieces. Anyway, any more information you have about that would be greatly appreciated.
Well, I shied away from using hay for mulch because hay is so susceptible to mold, and when it's wet, and I wanted something that, like the switchgrass or the straw, that that I could apply and not worry about introducing a lot of mold and fungus and plant diseases to my vegetable crops. And I was very happy with the prairie grass, very happy. In a drier year, I'm pretty happy with the other types of straw. But Jim Studi picked up on that right away, that the rust in the small grain straw, which was typical, there was no evidence of it in the prairie grass. It's a native species and it's not susceptible. From the one study that we did, I used switchgrass for, well, more than 10 years, and I never saw any mold. But a few times I did take old hay and early on, and I didn't like the extent to which it molded. And I would think it'd be even more susceptible to mold in a big round bale like that. That prairie grass that we unraveled had been wet, it was wet from the rain, and still there was no mold. It deteriorated, but it was just, I think that it starts with that, as a grass, it started with that lower carbon to nitrogen ratio, and it just breaks down naturally to the microbes in the soil, but not like the molding deterioration and decomposing of the hay. Hey, you're going to have alfalfa in it in addition to the grasses, or it might be just straight alfalfa. And alfalfa can be pretty stemmy too, which might have that higher carbon to nitrogen ratio like the other types of straw. I haven't studied that, but when you leave it over winter, you want it to be not something that's really hard to work back into the soil in the spring. And the switchgrass was the easiest for me with that rotavator to get back into the soil, continuing to decompose and not tying up nitrogen, but contributing it. Good questions.
Did that get at what you were thinking of, Lincoln? Because I know you're doing work into perennial clover, as you've talked about with this group before. Were you wondering, is that relevant to your question, or am I off base there?
No, not at all. I mean, I'm always thinking about clover, but this was no. I guess it was more of an equipment in the mulch system question, just about those points and how you're holding. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, just about those points and how versatile they are. You know, how difficult the transplanting is for the person sitting on that seat. If you're like, no, this is just, those points are a great solution for going into any sort of rolled out mulch. Or if you're like, well, it works in this situation, but not that situation, or it's kind of annoying and you really need a dedicated crew member on the back of that transplanter to be doing a good job putting it in. Yeah, just what the considerations are, I guess, as far as equipment and transplanting and those points are into this thick mulch.
Well, in terms of using it in other applications, if you're going to use the square bales, you're just rolling the water wheel over soil. And then you have all your tilled bed. You roll it, the water wheel transplanter over that soil. So it doesn't really matter how deep or how shallow the water wheel is, and the plants are all transplanted, and then the mulch is applied around the plants. In terms of the thickness of that mulch, I'm thinking of another thing that would be useful. There's been a criticism of mulch in that it would harbor ground squirrels, chipmunks, mice, who are going to harvest your vegetables. And our solution for that by day was a Jack Russell Terrier who came with me everywhere and was an excellent on patrol, just exterminating all along the beds constantly. And by night, the barn cats would go out and stalk the mulch, and we didn't have much problem at all with those pests. I don't know how a food inspection would like animals patrolling our crops, our vegetable crops, but well, we never had any problems. The thickness of the mulch, you know, the denser that mulch, the easier it's going to be for it to provide cover. And it's also more expensive. So, especially if you're paying to harvest mulch in a field or driving equipment there to mulch and driving it all home, those expenditures, you want to get as much mileage out of the mulch as possible, but you don't want it all just torn up and uneven in distribution. It does need to be evenly distributed. It does need to be thick enough to get that 10 to 14 weeks of suppression. The round bale, there's less control over the depth, and it is denser. But for something like potatoes, that was excellent because the round bales rotting over the potatoes didn't mind at all. And it was incredible how well the potatoes came right up through the mulch, no matter how dense it was, and the weeds did not. There was one little section of Canada thistle that came up through the mulch eventually, but there were no other weeds coming up through that round bale mulch. It was very. Now, in terms of people riding the water wheel, those two you saw on our water wheel was the first time they'd ever ridden the water wheel transplanter. Usually it was my wife and a farm apprentice, and my wife instructing as we went. But those two subscribers who were very loyal to us athletic and strong, very sharp. They had no problem. They had no problem with it. They'd come enough and planted enough with us. They didn't need any coaching at all. It's just obvious. There's a hole. It's wet. Reach in their hands around underneath the straw and patted the soil up around the bedding plant that they put in the ground. It's going very, it's going slowly enough that they can keep up. And I didn't use them. I didn't take those points on and off. I think I used them even in the black plastic. You could see from the picture that the point was a good inch above the existing spear from the transplanter, but the shape was such that it didn't so penetrate the plastic that it tore up, gouged a big hole. I found that I could just keep it on no matter what I used. It was actually better, made a deeper hole.
Jeremy, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just thought I would share a little bit about our experience with those points on our transplanter. We're working in a slightly, or actually pretty different system where it's a no-till, where we're mowing a cover crop in place and then applying more mulch from another site over the top, so that the soil is a little harder, and that that spike does effectively get through the mulch into the soil, but where the soil isn't tilled, it's a little harder, and we have found that we need to drive a little slower, and we need to have people pay better attention to. First of all, I guess the mulch kind of pokes into that hole a little bit, which might be partly, we're flail mowing, so that the pieces are a little smaller. People have to kind of pull the mulch out of the hole, and then it kind of leaves a hole rather than in the tilled soil. It leaves like a muddy zone. But with the no-till soil, it's more leaving a hole. So people need to put a little more effort into squeezing that hole shut. Yeah, 2 years into it, we're finding we're just having to drive a little slower, and it works out okay. And what we're trying to figure out is putting coulters on the front to kind of cut through that mulch.
Yeah, I was thinking of that because as you spoke, I was thinking coulters. You could rig up a set of coulters right in front of the hole that or the point.
Yeah, and we, this last season we got some coulters, and they worked pretty well for and rigged up a whole like frame on the front to put the coulters on. It worked pretty well going into leaf mulch, which we do earlier on in the season before the cover crops have really grown. But then going into the cut cover crop mulch, so we had like a straight coulter, and that didn't seem to work all that well. So we need to experiment a little more with, I think, different kinds of coulters.
Yeah, the old my drill that I use, an old McCormick drill with steel wheels, but a hydraulic to raise and lower the coulters with it has two coulters for each distribution of seed on 9 feet, and that's for the small grain. So 2 coulters does sound like proven.
In a V shape, or 2, one behind the other?
They're in a V shape, side by side. But I've also seen single coulters in some of the older grain planters. Whatever equipment you use or manufacture, you will have to make adjustments and adapt, and it's part of part of the joy of there are at least 3 things that break down a day, and if at night you've only had 2, well, you've had quite a successful day, you know. Things will break and things will not work, but therein will be innovation and improvement. Another reason for cooperatives and producer pools and organizations like this.
Thanks, Mike, Patty. Nice to see you. I think they're gone already. Any other questions for Tony before we wrap up? We've got just a few minutes left.
Yeah, I've got another question or maybe statement. Seems like, or I want to know what you think, I guess, about some sort of SARE funded or some sort of grant funded continuation of the work that you've been doing and move it into the next generation here. I have 100 acres of grassland that I really, you know, we've kind of committed to not doing any other crops besides grass. I really love the birds, and, you know, so we've made hay traditionally. I grew up on a dairy farm, you know, I understand the process of making hay and all that stuff. And one thing that struck me that I haven't had the opportunity to try yet, but that I feel like might be a fun little experiment would be to use some old chopping equipment, or just, it doesn't necessarily have to be old, but that's the cheaper stuff. But well, actually, so what I've got is a couple old choppers, self-unloading wagons, and I've got a flail chopper. And, you know, I'm hoping next year I'm going to be able to make at least a few loads of chopped hay that I will then spread out on gardens using the self-unloading wagon. I feel like the advantage, of course, to that is that you've got the material is a lot more broken down, easier to move. You get more of a uniform distribution across the bed. And you also have a lot more control over the uniformity of thickness on the bed, I think. You know, I imagine, I mean, I have done it in the past, not, you know, not in any sort of sustained way, but I think I'm trying to set that up for next year for a few of our plots, because I feel like, I mean, we used like I said, we mulched 3 beds, 300-foot beds of kale last year. And that was going into a tilled ground, but then we mulched it. We mulched it with, I think we used at least 8,000 plus pound bales on those 3 beds. So it was very thick. Mm-hmm. And I think that is, to me, that's the most important part about this cutting, is you have to put it on so thick. I mean, if you put on like a couple inches and the soil disappears, you're like, okay, that's great. That's not even close to enough, because stuff's going to come through there. And that's why I feel like the self-unloading wagons could be a really cool addition to some garden experience. So I don't know. You think there's any SARE money for that?
I don't know. But in terms of thickness, I have never 3 inches was adequate for 10 to 14 weeks of weed suppression. I was always careful not to over apply mulch, because I didn't want to make it impossible for that Jack Russell or those cats to find a mouse or a chipmunk trying to eat our vegetables. And if you are renting ground and tending switchgrass or any other small grain, and the expense of the seed and the establishment, the rent, the harvest, the storage, the application, to me, I was very frugal with the mulch and careful not to over apply more than I found over 15 years of mulching that I needed. And I have not found that I needed it to be so thick.
That's fascinating. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I hear y'all are popping off. Thanks for being with us. I'll get